Stop it. So I'm Jason Bolt, host of the Vecteris Expert Series, and I'm very excited to be joined by Eisha Armstrong and David DeWolf today. Eisha is the co-founder and executive chairman of Vecteris and has spent the last 5 years helping B2B services organizations tech enable their offerings. David is the CEO and founder of Knownwell, which recently announced a super exciting investment in its AI intelligence platform. And I can't imagine a better duo than Eisha and David to walk us through generative AI and its impact on customers in the B2B services space. So welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Jason. Great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Quick note for the audience. This is a fairly unstructured conversation, and we're taking questions throughout in the chat. And so just type your question in there, and we will be sure to get to it either just naturally if it ties into one of the themes, or at the end of the conversation as we keep on going. As you can see, there's a couple QR codes on the page here. If you'd like to grab a free copy of our book, Productize, which is about how you can turn services into scalable products, be sure to scan the one on the left. And then if you want to learn more about Knownwell's client intelligence waitlist that they've just recently announced, be sure to check that out on the right-hand side. But okay, so to go ahead and kick us off here for the conversation, David and Eisha, you're both talking to executives every single day about generative AI. And the pace of developments and change has just been eye-boggling over the past year or so. So can you start by sharing how those conversations have evolved over the last 6 to 12 months? What's been the story that you've seen unfolding? Eisha, we'll start with you, and then David, we'll ask you to chime in and share your perspective.
Yeah, thank you. And big thanks, David, for being here today. I'm so excited about this. So thank you.
Looking forward to the conversation. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, right before we went live, we were joking about Google's new announcement about Gemini replacing Bard. And I think that is just really emblematic of how this is unfolded, which is like it's unfolding so quickly, it's really hard to keep up. A lot of executives and I think even commercials now are referring to this as the wild, wild west. And I think that's accurate. But I do think the one thing that certainly I believe very strongly, I think the data and the research of the economists and people who've dug into this, I think the leaders that I work with and talk to do all agree on is that this is different. That AI is going to be a revolutionary change for professional services, not an evolutionary change. And that, I think, is really, if there's one message I want to keep drumming, that's the message that I want to drum, that this is really important. And this is different from other technological advancements that we've seen more recently.
So one of the things that I would add to that is that every now and then we do have every couple decades something that is revolutionary. But what's different this time from even the internet, for example, is that almost nobody disagrees, right? Usually everybody, that's not really going to be a big deal. This time around, everybody is saying, oh, absolutely. It's transformative. It's different. I think that's interesting. The other thing that I'm noticing in all of my conversations is that there has started to be a shift, right? So I would say over the last year and a half, there have really been 3 conversations going on. The first one is about the LLMs and the technology, interesting developments, but really doesn't apply to a lot of us, right? Then you had the conversation about personal productivity and how this technology can be used to help us do better at things. And people started to experiment a little bit, but really what we saw more than anything was it was individuals on their own, either in their personal lives or in their work life, not corporate initiatives. And then you finally have the big topic of conversation, which is how's this going to transform business? What's it going to do to jobs? And that's really been left untouched for a period of time. We are seeing 2 different shifts in all of our conversations. The very first one relates to the personal productivity aspects of it, those initial kind of tooling use cases. I would say last summer, people were paralyzed. They didn't know where to start. Now we are seeing corporate executives actually push change, encourage it, and the early adopters to actually move, not just be overwhelmed. There are a lot of experiments going on right now. And so you are falling behind, especially in professional services, if you aren't experimenting it and using and adding value with your clients. We're talking to some customers who are actually using this for 60% of the work that they're doing, embedding it into their core delivery. And then the other thing that we see is we're starting to see more and more companies actually understand the use cases, not only in those execution level things, but also operationally. How can this help us be smarter about how we allocate resources, how we plan, how we prioritize? And so we're starting to see the first movement of application to professional services businesses really play out.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to note, David, that we're kind of getting beyond experimentation now to real use cases.
Mhm.
The conversation that has come up, I would say probably the last 2 months, is how do we get adoption of these
Mhm.
technologies? So now that we've experimented with these and in some cases started to make some pretty significant investments, how are we going to encourage adoption? Because I do think you're right. Like this is everyone's agreement. This is a big change, and it's causing people to fundamentally rethink how they create value, which can be scary and can also maybe prevent some people from wanting to adopt it.
There is no doubt about that. And I think one of the things we can pull from is looking back at history and other inventions and what has happened, right? It typically takes some time for true disruption to take place, right? When I say true disruption, a lot of times people think, oh, technology, we're automating parts of the workflow. No, true disruption is when an industry, the economics of that industry are totally transformed. Right. That's true disruption. So when you start talking about how we create value and business models, we're starting to get to that true disruption. Right. So usually that takes decades, right? It's 10 years, it's 15 years, it's 20 years to come up with these very revolutionary business models. The timeline with AI and the democratization of AI has happened so quickly. The pace is so much faster that I think everybody fears it's going to be tomorrow. But I do think we're still on that early side of the business model change. The economic disruption isn't there yet. But you are digging yourself a hole if you're not beginning to experiment and get comfortable with and inject it in the more incremental aspects, because that will give you the skills that you need in order to be able to turn on a dime when that business model appears or whatnot.
Yeah, yeah. And I would say certainly we see with especially our larger clients who had access to the early access programs last year
Mhm.
and started to get some real adoption in the second half of last year. They are being, whether they like it or not, being forced to answer some of these business model transformation questions.
Mhm.
So, should we still be charging time and materials when we can now automate 50%, if not more, of the work that
Right.
we were doing previously? And how should we be adopting our statements of work and our
Mhm.
pricing models? And it's like these questions are starting to pop up around business model transformation, which again gets people back on their heels and in a place of fear.
Right. Right. But the lesson we can learn from history is that you've got to push into that, right? Don't get stuck in the innovator's dilemma, right? You're going to have to reinvent your business, which means it's going to be scary, right? But if you don't, you will become Blockbuster, right? You'll become Borders Books. You'll become, whatever.
Right.
And none of us want to go back to those days. We have lots of stories to tell about that. The other trend that I'm seeing in this adoption question is there seems to be a trend around who is adopting and who is not. I'm hearing over and over again, especially within delivery teams of all sorts of different sorts. It is the craftspeople, those that are more senior, that really know their skills inside and out, that are excelling with this new technology and see how it can really accelerate them even further. Whereas the more junior folks, folks that may not be as experienced or as skilled, may be more resistant, but also may just be struggling to figure out how to use it as much. And I find that interesting. I don't think as an industry we know exactly why that is yet or if it's going to stay that way, but it's an observation I think everybody should be paying attention to.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great insight. Um, it's interesting because when I talk to professionals about why might there be objections to adoption, whether it's senior level or more junior level. Certainly they go to fear, they go to misunderstanding, but they also go to this question of, I don't have time to learn it. Right?
Totally.
Right. Which is, to your point, the only way that people are going to learn is if they dive in and start experimenting with it.
That's right. Yeah, I see that especially actually in the executive ranks. What I am seeing in boardrooms is that organizations want their employees to be using it to increase productivity, but then you ask them when the last time they used it or what the use case for them is, and they haven't even thought about it. And I'm really recommending, I think the only way you can lead change in your organization is if you actually get this and understand it. And I find a lot of executives don't really understand what AI is, right? They don't understand that the difference between compute and doing mathematical equations in a deterministic fashion where there's one answer and 2 + 2 always equals 4 is fundamentally different than what AI is doing in inferring conclusions from probabilistic data that leads to, it's basically replicating our gut feeling that we have as human beings, right? That I see 7 different data points and I'm able to see those, parse them out of the noise, say they're important, and then connect the dots between them. That's inference. That's what's happening. And I think to really get that, executives need to, number one, grapple with it, but then number two, go use it. And so I'm recommending, if you are writing a strategy document, go ask ChatGPT to create a draft for you. Just see what it comes up with, right? Force yourself 2 or 3 times a day to use it, and then also find an excuse to go use an AI tool. I think a really easy one is Grammarly Pro, right? Go get Grammarly to help you rewrite what you're writing and make it better. It takes a lot of time out of the editorial process. Just being exposed is so important for leaders, and I find that they're not doing it enough.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they're not. The other thing, though, that I think, is interesting about the playing with it is not just talking about how can it automate the work. Perhaps we were doing like another great use case, have it create a PowerPoint presentation for you, but also how can it help you get better information to serve your client in a new and different way? And I think that's where, when you think about trying to capture the hearts and minds of people around this technology, when you start talking about new ways to create value versus automate or make your work more efficient, that's when I think the light bulb starts to go off and people are more likely to want to experiment with it. Because especially in professional services, where a lot of our job satisfaction comes from delivering value to our clients. And so, recognizing that now AI gives us, better information than perhaps we had before. And we can create, better, more accurate forecasts or better analyses or, see patterns that perhaps we weren't able to see before. Switching that conversation from kind of automation and efficiency to like serving your clients more productively, providing better insight, perhaps even coming up with new services, that seems to get people also more engaged.
Yeah, and I think it's actually really good to break these down and look at, I actually see a third option there that kind of sits in the middle, right, in terms of creating value. So we have the pure efficiency of just doing the work we're doing more. But interestingly, if you step back and you look at a knowledge worker's time in a week, research shows that we spend 85% of our week not doing the actual task of the work, but coordinating it in bureaucracy, in reporting, in managing, in like the operations of the business, right? And I actually think that's a really interesting place that is in between, where there is a lot of power we can get from really inferring judgments and helping us make better decisions that allow us to not only do the things we're doing better and faster, but to do the right things in the first place that can guide us to make better decisions. And then I think that then leads to what you're talking about in terms of the productization and then bringing it to your customer and actually packaging, pricing, all of that type of value. And I think if you look at it as that entire value chain, that we have to do all 3 of these types of things, it can be a powerful way to really find those use cases and break them down, identify where can I invest to get the most bang for my buck.
If I can jump in, I want to double click on this dichotomy a little bit, because I've heard you both talk about this aspect of there's three categories: our internal efficiency, productivity, where everyone is, it seems like 99% focused right now.
Mm-hmm.
And we're missing the operational use cases. We're missing the growth cases.
Yep.
What's going on there? Like, why is it difficult for executives to think about this and generate those use cases, or frontline, whatever it might be? Like, what's going on that's making that framework difficult to enact right now?
Yeah. I would start with the fact that number one, it's just harder, right? To envision how I write a document faster is pretty easy, right? I've got now a digital assistant that's putting a first draft out for me, and okay, that's simple. But to imagine the intelligence doing something that doesn't even happen right now, I think is difficult, especially when I'll go back to the last point we made. Executives aren't using it. They don't know what it is, right? And so, in order to innovate, in order to have process innovation, right, and some of these things, we have to actually have our hands around the technology to imagine what's possible. And the art of the possible is actually really, really hard. And so I think what you're going to see is, I think this is actually the year of what I'm calling enterprise AI, right? It wasn't until almost a decade after the advent of the internet that Salesforce came along and introduced this brand new business model of cloud computing and being a cloud company, and thought differently about problems, right? How contact sharing was always hard because I had to trade, manually individual contacts. All of a sudden it's in the cloud. Wow, what a big deal, right? We can share information instantaneously. That type of thing is going to happen with AI this year. It's moving up the stack from, for decades we've been doing robotics and manual labor. Now we're doing knowledge work and the execution. Operations is next. And I think as you see 1, 2, 3 use cases introduced, the light bulb is going to start to go on. And executives are going to say, oh, I can do this, I could do that. But right now, it's just unforeseen territory. We're on the frontier.
Yeah. And you're so right, David. It's hard for people to imagine the art of something that has not even been done yet.
Mhm.
We had a client who ran an internal contest
Mhm.
on different use cases for AI. 99% of them were focused on operational efficiency,
Mm.
just automating work that they were already doing. Only 1% were focused on growth or, like you said, reducing the amount of time we spend interacting with each other in meetings.
Right.
Yeah, it's really
I
powerful.
think the other piece of this is, I think a lot of times, because it is generative AI that has
Mhm.
caught people's attention, they are thinking about the creative work of actually producing some sort of piece of content, whether that's software code or, you name it, doesn't matter. But their mindset is oriented around, they think of AI as generative AI. Well, generative AI is only one class of AI, right? And right. I always go back to, for decades, the intelligence community has been using artificial intelligence to take massive amounts of images, figure out which ones they should pay attention to, and then do something about it, right? That's not generative at all, right? But does it solve a real problem? Yes. And so, really getting your hands around it can do more than write content, and start thinking about, what? Yes, it's great at writing content, but it's also great at finding signal and noise. And it's also great at connecting the dots between disparate pieces of information that may not be obviously connected. Where do I have that problem in my business and never been able to solve it? And I kind of take the problem for granted, right? And I think that's what we have to like build that muscle to do more and more.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there are two different altitudes maybe to come at this from the perspective of what makes this particularly hard for it if you're a B2B professional services organization. So I've heard you both talk a little bit about one, which is the mindset of
Mhm.
professionals that exist within the organization. What is helpful about that mindset they have today, and then maybe what gets in the way of thinking about AI as a technology in that sense?
Well, I'll start with, and this, whether it's AI or any kind of innovation, one of the things that historically has made professional firms successful is their expertise, their ability to know the answer, right? I always like to say, I pay my attorney to know the law, not learn the law. But as David's pointing out, this is new technology that's going to require experimentation and learning. And that's different from always knowing the answer or being the expert. And so I think that's an interesting kind of contrast between, a set of behaviors that's highly valued in traditional professional services where we're paid for our expertise versus, a company that's experimenting with and deploying technology in new and different ways. You have to kind of put that learner's hat on in order to be successful. Another thing that we see is this value that's placed on perfectionism. So again, if I'm paying very high hourly rates to my attorney, I am expecting near perfect documents and not things that are buggy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, when you start moving things, especially with using new technology, moving things to that environment, you have to change kind of, what's good enough, and take a more iterative approach to development, where things are perfected over time as opposed to being perfect out of the gate. So again, it's a kind of a compare and contrast between behaviors and norms that are valued in traditional professional services versus what are valued in more kind of tech native, product native organizations.
I'm going to take that from a slightly different perspective because I agree with all that, but I see something really big that's going on right now. If you go query leaders, and actually Oracle just did a study on this that I found fascinating. 91% of leaders will tell you that they have so much data and information flying at them that it is hurting their decision making. Right here we are, we live in this world of data and how important it is, and everybody's saying no, it's too much now, it's killing me, right? I think that is the noisy world that we live in now, and I think the biggest thing that I see is people just don't have the time, they don't have the mental space to be creative. And it sounds really simple and it sounds almost silly to say, but I'm encouraging executives, find time to get away and think, build the space, because you are in an inflection point in this economy where everything is changing. And if you are just running and doing and reacting, you're never going to have the time to figure it out what it means to your business. And so it sounds simple and it sounds easy, but it is absolutely essential.
Yeah, especially if we're talking about the kind of business model transformation that this is going to trigger within professional services firms. Because, yeah, leaders have to be thinking about not just kind of new ways of doing work for their clients, but new ways of generating value, making money, organizing. Yeah, that's such a good point. I've been rereading Greg McKeown's book, Essentialism. If you're
Yeah,
familiar with
it's a
that,
great
yeah,
book.
it is
So
a good book. And it's like, it's really relevant for this time that we're in, even though it's now, I think, 10 years old.
Very, very
Yeah.
relevant, no doubt about it. And it's, I think it leads me to one of the things that AI I think is going to do, and I think it will do with this operationally. We're talking about all these co-pilots these days, but we're thinking about it again at the execution level of actually performing work. I actually think the big lift operationally is going to come when we have, call it a co-pilot, call it your chief of staff, right? Call it your whatever you want to call it, but actually helping you manage the business, right? When we look at what is truly human, leadership is truly human, but management is a science, and management is harnessing the power of humanity versus unleashing it, which is what leadership is. I really think that we have got distracted in so much of the science, so much of the looking at data, looking at dashboards, the reports, the accountability, all essential to business. But we are so bogged down by the amount of information there and trying to find the signal from the noise that it's actually taking us away from being able to do these strategic thinking sessions, for example, right? And so to me, one of the big uplifts is going to be leaders having at their disposal the intelligence. And one of the really cool things about AI is it doesn't just give me another report to go look at. It's not just another SaaS platform. It can tell me what I need to know before I even know to ask the question, right? Before I even know it's something I should know. And it can reach out to me and we can use that technology to tell me what's important. And then all of a sudden I can do what only I can do as a human being because I have at my fingertips actionable intelligence. And that's why at Knownwell, we're building a operating system to help professional leaders, professional services leaders to really drive their business because we can find out all sorts of things about the health of your client, for example, that you have no idea about simply by looking at the natural communication that already happens within the enterprise that we're not tapping and turning into data because it doesn't fit in a dashboard. But I can infer, I can make judgments, and I can sit up and say, hey, you've got a problem that you don't even know about. And I think that will begin to give us our time back and really help us to lead more effectively.
Yeah, I love that, David. It's like AI is going to make us more human, right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think this is our charge as leaders, right? With every technology, every single technology is amoral, right? It's how we use it that matters, right? And so I love what you just said. Let's you and I commit, we're going to find ways for AI to make us more human, not less, because
Right.
we've seen technologies hit that totally erode our humanity. And I think that's the ethical dilemma people are grappling with now that scares them a little bit is like, ooh, I've seen this go awry with social media. Look what it did in terms of polarization of our society. Look what it did in terms of my kids being addicted to it and not having real relationships. Well, let's learn from that and say with AI, we're not going to let that happen. Let's make sure that it elevates us versus trying to replace human relationships or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Allows us to do what's uniquely human, right? The
Amen.
relationships, the creative thinking. Yeah. Yeah. So you did mention what you're doing at Knownwell. Do you mind if we double click on that? Because that's one of the reasons why we were
Sure.
excited
Yeah.
to have you on today.
Yeah, we're having a fun time. So ultimately, what are we doing? We are helping our customers to improve their client retention, delight their clients, drive more growth from their client relationships, and ultimately operating that entire machine more efficiently. We do that by consuming all the natural communications. So think about, we estimate that about 75% of communications with your clients are in untapped resources that we can tap, we just haven't. So email, Slack channels, video recordings, right? And there's so much rich data there that tells you not a point in time NPS survey what they said about you, but what they actually believe about you. And so we are taking that and we're distilling that into three fundamental questions. Then the first one is, what is the perception of our service quality? Number two is, what is the strength of the relationship in this B2B environment? We have many people to many people. Nobody sits at the intersection of all those communications and say, what's the actual strength and where are the holes? How do I improve it? And then finally, what is our alignment commercially? And how do we react to executive sponsor changes, budgetary constraints, strategic direction shifts? We're taking all of that and layering, not just, I'll take the example of the strength of the customer relationship. Most firms can say, okay, here's the influencers and here who they're connected with, and we have a relationship. Okay, and then the advanced ones are counting how many times you're communicating, but who's layering on the tone and the sentiment and saying, hey, the emails have gotten more terse, and hey, the tone indicates there's an issue, and oh, by the way, now you're avoiding meetings, and this meeting's been postponed, and that combines with the invoices late, and all of a sudden I have 17 different data points that tell me, ooh, this client is at risk. you and I would sit in the middle of that and we'd have a gut feeling go off. But right now, as you scale an organization, it's really hard to scale that. And we have so much information, we don't pick up on those signals as much. So what we're able to do is translate that into actionable intelligence to say, here's the most important things that you need to do, both from a client perspective to strengthen a single commercial relationship, but then also from a firm perspective, saying operationally, the weakest part of your business is your account management or is service delivery, right? And so we're helping with the planning and the prioritization of what we do so that we truly can be client-centric. Firms claim that they're client-centric, but if you don't have real institutionalized client intelligence and really know the depths of those three questions and pull it into your planning and prioritization process, you're not. You're not client-centric. And so that's what we're doing. We're helping organizations, specifically professional services organizations, to really take their operations to the next level, to instill that rigor and discipline around doing what is actually important for moving the needle.
Wow. Wow. Very powerful. So it's not just identifying those that are at risk, but diagnosing it and really prescribing then how to improve.
That's exactly right. So I'll give you a fun example that a lot of people just get blown away by. If you go ask, and I've talked to hundreds of professional services leaders over the last few months, just as we've been really gaining insights for this product. And I ask all the time, when you think about, we'll just take the example of client retention and churn. When you think about why one of your clients churns, what is it? And every single time, within the top two most of the time, but if not, it's number three, an organization will say an executive sponsor leaves. When my executive sponsor leaves, it puts my account at risk. Well, we can obviously be responsive to that, but you know what's pretty cool? We can actually predict it before the person's actually accepted a job. We can figure out, ooh, they're in market. Guess what? They're connecting on LinkedIn with people that are competitors or with executive recruiters. And oh, by the way, they've canceled 4 meetings between 1 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon when most interviews take place. And oh, by the way, they seem to be avoiding meetings with this specific person, right? We can put all those dots together. That you and I know this, right? Running organizations, we've had that gut feeling before about an employee about to depart. That
Right.
gut feeling comes from those data points that are put together. But with our clients, we don't see it. We have way too many of them, the data points we may not even know about. And so that's a great example where we can say, ooh, that's happening. And then combine it with, we do a relationship social map to say who has a relationship with who is the biggest influencer, who's the actual buyer. And we can combine that risk of departure with, what does the rest of the account look like? How much have we surrounded the account? What risk does that provide? And all of a sudden reach out to you and say, Eisha, you don't even know this, but you have huge risk here because you think you're safe because of this one person, but they're about to leave and the rest of the relationship is weak. Go build a relationship very specifically with these 3 people in order to provide yourself a safety net. And we can get that prescriptive about what to do. Now it takes all that homework off of your plate. You can go do what you're uniquely qualified to do as a human being and as an executive, is to go build those relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. And talk about ROI. Because that keeps coming up, David, in the conversations that we have, which is, some of these investments required to really use AI well are pretty eye-popping. But if you can point to things like improved client retention, for example, that's very clear. All right.
Totally. Well, I think there's two sides of that equation. I think this is an important point about adoption. So 100% agree. ROI is coming up more and more in the last 3 to 4 months. And I think it's because more experimentation is happening. However, I see enterprises making a huge mistake. You are right to look at the top line and what is it going to drive in terms of impact to your business. You've also got to look at the cost. And I see a lot of businesses that are still investing heavily in their data infrastructure, right? Because of this notion we have to have clean data and the modern data stack. that is good and well for a lot of large organizations. I think a lot of middle market organizations are going to be shocked by the things they are building right now that will be commodities or baked into products when they're released. So, example, we're getting questions all of the time about our platform that we're building and say, "Oh boy, eyes roll back in the head. How much is it going to cost? I'm going to have to integrate with all these data sources." We're actually building it to just drink from the fire hose, right? All we need is API access to a series of systems, and you don't have to do any of the data engineering to get a data warehouse ready for us. We take that on. It is part of what we're doing, and we're using artificial intelligence to churn through that and make sense of this information so it doesn't have to be structured. And that low friction is so important for adoption from our side. But on the other side, I think every business is hearing this. I'm already spending millions of dollars on this implementation, on my business intelligence, on this and that. I can't afford one more system. What you're going to see is a new class of enterprise software coming out that takes the integration out of the question and just does it for you and automates it for you and makes it easy. And what those firms that are investing heavily right now are going to find out in 3 months, in 6 months, in 9 months, they just built something that they could have bought for a fraction of the price. So I'd have that in my mind. Am I building something everybody else is going to need? And really, I'm wasting money because I'm just 3 months ahead on something that's not going to keep up with the actual innovation? Or am I building something that's truly proprietary? And I think that's where the things you've brought up about productization, right? And something that's unique value prop for customers, that's where I'd be spending my investment dollars internally as in building instead of buying.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally great point. It was, last summer when PwC announced they were spending like $2 billion on AI. And people were talking about it. I was like, well, realize that most of that money is going for PwC to stand up a whole new services arm to help other companies adopt AI. The $2 billion investment is not just for their, chat PwC that they created.
So true. So true.
We had a great question that came in related to this, which is just about what examples are you seeing, without naming company names, but just things that you've kind of seen in practice around where organizations are using the technology to provide customer or value to customers in a different way. So would love both your perspectives on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to give a couple, and then David, I'm sure you have a lot. So I'll stay with kind of the growth perspective. So one management consulting company that we work with kept hearing from the compensation and benefits experts that they serve that they needed a better way to empower their local HR business partners. So they were serving comp and ben executives at the corporate center. Local HR business partners needed to be able to act faster and serve talent with, especially the talent with the high demand skills, so that they could create compelling, market-informed counteroffers when they would try to get poached from other companies. So they are using generative AI to create a tool that gives those local HR business partners the data and the expertise that was once locked in the heads of the corporate center comp and ben professionals. So it's reducing that bottleneck that the corporate center used to create by kind of using AI to democratize those skills, democratize that information. And I think that's a great example of what David just mentioned, of kind of productizing skills and data that they already have internally in a proprietary tool that their clients can then use to make faster comp and ben decisions when they're in kind of that high pressure, quick turnaround time cycle for really high demand talent. So I love that example.
That's a great example, and it's a great example of building something. I'll go the other direction since we're talking professional services, and expertise has come up a couple of times. I've actually seen a few firms, but there's one in particular in the marketing services space that I've seen that have just leaned in and pushed in and said, we are going to be the best in the world at leveraging these tools, and we're going to embed it in our value proposition. And so they have been deliberate about just plowing past the innovator's dilemma and saying, we are going to pass on to our clients the reality that we're experts in these tools. We're going to write every single press release leveraging this technology. Because of that, we're going to pass that savings on to you, right? And what's happened is, have their hours gone down? Yes. But have their billing rates gone up? Yeah. Right. And so there's different ways to look at that. And I just like that because it's so simple, right? They have simply said, we're not going to be afraid of it. We're going to embrace it. And I've seen it in a couple of different areas, but that one in particular in marketing was very compelling to me.
Yeah, that's great that they're able to do that. I think, for firms who maybe aren't ready to like fully disrupt, one model that we've seen is creating a new business, perhaps an ancillary business that is using generative AI to serve a more price sensitive
Mm.
segment of the market.
Mhm.
So, for example, we were working with a company that creates explainer videos.
Mhm.
And a big part of their value proposition is not just in creating the video, but it's
Mhm.
also advising on how to simplify the message.
Mhm.
But they did realize that now with generative AI, they can automate a lot of the creation of the video, and that there may be an audience that couldn't afford their services earlier and maybe doesn't need as much messaging support, the things that
Mhm.
uniquely human, but we'll use this other tool. So they created an ancillary business to serve a different market segment that's more price sensitive using AI.
Mm-hmm. Here's another example you just made me think of. I'll throw out there is one of the areas of business I think is going to be totally transformed is knowledge management. I think we still stink at knowledge management as a whole in the vast majority of organizations. And I've seen some organizations begin to use AI to really solve that problem and take the corpus of knowledge and train up on it. And there's two ways that I'm seeing it really play out. One is simply internally, so consultants can tap that corpus of knowledge more easily. And the other one is actually exposing that to clients and beginning to productize and digitize some of the internal benchmarking data and expert knowledge that exists within the firm. And I think both of those are interesting plays on that idea. And ultimately, I think that's an area we're going to see lots of advances in the future, especially in professional services.
Yeah, that's a great one. Wow, very cool.
I want to go super practical here, putting myself in the shoes of the audience. So if I'm a professional services firm, I've historically priced based on time and materials. I'm talking publicly about all the amazing efficiencies I'm getting from generative AI. Like, am I lowering my prices? Like, how do I think about that? Like, what does the pricing equation look like?
Yeah, so I mean, just based on the clients that I've worked with who are dealing with this, because they did do that, Jason, it depends, right? So if you like David mentioned with the one, if you're able to justify an increase in your bill rate because of the costs of the new technology and tools that you've invested in, perhaps your revenue may not go down. But you have to have that conversation with your clients. You've got to be transparent and manage their expectations. If you are using that time to do higher value activities, so different in kind analyses that you couldn't do before, your revenue may not decline. But I'm also encouraging organizations that we work with to also be thinking about how they can start migrating to more value-added pricing and fixed pricing, or at least some type of hybrid for this year. And that's what we saw with changes in engagement letters that went out, for 2024 services, is that they were trying to move to more hybrid models.
I'm curious, Eisha, do you have a vision of ultimately where we will land in terms of that question 2, 3, 4 years down the road?
Well, I hate to say it depends. I think it depends on the type of work that we're talking about.
Okay.
So I agree. We're in a massive disruption right now where we are having to rethink what requires a human.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's changing every day. especially, as these large language models get better. And so at some point, I think we will start to reach some level of stability where we know what's going to require a human and what's not going to require a human.
Mm-hmm.
I have never, however, been a fan of time and materials pricing. And it is good when you're in an environment where things are very up in the air and you're not sure, you can't put a fixed fee on it. But it gets most organizations in that lose-lose box of, you can only grow as you add more people, which is the whole reason why our business exists, is to teach professional services firms how to productize. But no, I think there still will be a place for time and materials pricing. Hopefully it will radically shrink, but we won't know until we know truly like what a human needs to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the value-based pricing thing has been really the golden egg everybody's been pursuing for such some time, and I think it's hard to get to. I do wonder if this advancement will help us in some way. I think it's always hard for an organization who has confidence in a service provider to share the rewards of what they're going to engage and do, right? How will that change this equation? I don't know. I don't see it yet, but I do think that this industry as a whole, we talked, I don't know, 30 minutes ago, about what true disruption is. I think this is the next industry. It's one of the last ones that hasn't been disrupted by digital, right? It is time for the economics of the professional services industry to be turned on its head. And we don't know what that's going to look like yet. But I think on the other side, we're going to crack the nut and figure out how do we actually share in value versus just dealing with the raw materials, right? Which is what we're doing right now with the time and materials.
Yeah. And again, back to a place of like optimism and hope, which is like, how do we use this to free us up to do what is uniquely human? The things that we really hopefully value.
That's right.
Yeah.
Totally.
On that note, we had a question come in. I'll just read it because it's really good. It appears the technology is evolving 5 to 10 times faster than adoption or corporate change management. So speaking of the human element, what practices do you recommend to help your customers think through this constant change or leapfrog mentality?
Oh,
Change management, it
yeah.
always is the thing, right? It's real because we're human. I hope you have the secret. I don't know that I do, Eisha.
Yeah, and I know the person who asked it, so I know where this is coming from. Yeah, so I do continue to beat the drum that change management is not a nice to have, it's a need to have. And that is not just for AI, business model transformation, but everything in the world is changing quickly. And as humans, we don't like change, and we are, our brains are wired for fear. And so whatever we can do as leaders to reduce the fear, lead by example, David, talking about experimenting with it, and giving voice to our own fears. I think that also helps people. Like when you're able to actually, diagnose and name it, it reduces in its acuteness. And those are things that maybe leaders may not feel comfortable talking about, but I think it's critically important that we just say, look, this is unknown. This is the wild, wild west. But think about the opportunity, right? Think of all the growth. If you can diagnose better than you ever could before that a client is about to leave, and get the recipe on how to retain them, think about how that transforms your professional services firm. Or if you're now able to serve entirely new market segments or solve new customer problems that you couldn't solve before, like just think how exciting that is and what the growth might look like. And if we can finally escape this trap of time and materials billing, hourly bill rates and utilization rates and all these like horrible metrics that we all hate, like what a better world that might be. So that's what gets me excited. And I think that's the kind of language our leaders need to be using.
I want to pull that one step further because
Please.
you got to the impact and helping envision the future of what could we become. I think a really important point of that is helping the employee, the rank and file employee, understand why it's good for them. Because I think a lot of times people are hearing, oh yeah, it's going to make us more efficient. There's more profit, right? For you, they get it from a business perspective. But I think some of the resistance is from the personal perspective of, oh my gosh, fear, this is going to take away my job, right? Oh my gosh, fear, everybody's going to be able to be as good as I am. Oh my gosh, fear, go on and on and on. And so I think being intentional about talking about how it will impact the individual human person and elevate their lives, not just the business that sits around them, is a really key part.
Yeah. Yeah. You're totally right. Totally right. I will also add, Doug, who asked this question, and we've talked about this before, the importance of getting the organization used to experimenting and used to failing. Amy Edmondson, who is kind of like the grandmother of psychological safety and wrote The Fearless Organization, she just came out with this great new book called The Right Kind of Wrong. And it talks about how to create really good experiments and how to learn well from failures. And I think the more that we can just get everyone in the organization comfortable with this idea of not knowing, right, and experimenting, the easier it will be to keep up with a high pace of change. And experimentation needs to become a muscle that's well developed in organizations.
Totally agree with that.
We're almost at time. So you are two founders who have placed bets on the B2B professional services spaces. So I guess wrap up by talking a little bit about why should these firms be thinking about generative AI a little bit differently than other companies? And then if they want to come and talk to either of you, what can they expect to get help with?
Yeah, so I'll start and say I think it's actually a fun and exciting time for professional services, right? There is no doubt this industry, go look at any economic report, this industry is predicted to be the one that is the most disrupted, right? I think I saw one stat, 41% of the labor within a professional services organization will be able to be automated and changed because of this technology. That actually creates a ton of opportunity. I think one of the really fun, exciting things that's going to come out of this is that the middle market is going to see a revival. We have really fallen into this barbell, right? Where we have the large service providers, and then we have boutiques. There's not a lot of middle market. I think we're going to, through AI, start to democratize some of the manual labor that has been in the large, big four consulting firms, those types of things that only they can afford to do to run a machine. And it's going to pull it down and help organizations get past the $100 million mark is really hard to get past in professional services, right? It was painful when I did it. I had to break everything and plow through it. I think you're going to see the middle market thrive. And I find that exciting. It means that all of the boutiques have an opportunity to get to the next level if that's what they want. It means that those middle market firms that have stalled out can get growing again because they're going to have access to different practices, processes, intelligence that they've never been able to compete with. So that's my hope. That's my excitement. That's why I've dove right back into it. After retiring from leading a professional services organization for 16 years, I just saw the potential and how it could change the industry that I love. To me, what's exciting about that is professional services more than anybody, you're talking about human beings. And we need ethical leadership in this space, making sure the technology is adopted well. So feel free to check out knownwell.com. Like you mentioned a couple of times, we've just opened up our beta program. We are leveraging our intelligent operating system to really help organizations to reduce their client churn, to increase their growth, drive that operational efficiency that that we've talked about, and it's really cool, exciting new technology. And we're looking for folks that want to co-develop it with us and be part of shaping that future. And so feel free to check it out. We also have a weekly podcast called the AI Know-How that I'd invite folks to come check out as well. We talk about exactly what we've been talking about here, which is the adoption of AI, not the technology itself, but the adoption in the enterprise.
Amazing.
That's great. Yeah. And I would put in another plug for David's podcast. It's fantastic. I love it.
Thanks.
Yeah. Only thing I would add is I think our jobs are going to be better. If AI allows us to do what is, only uniquely human, we will have higher job satisfaction. So very, very excited about that.
Amazing.
Oh, where can you see us? I don't know. There was a QR code, right, Jason, you put up? I'm sure you're getting our emails already if you're here. But I'm personally on LinkedIn, Eisha Armstrong. Feel free to connect with me there.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for taking the time. It was a really fun conversation. And if you have questions, be sure to let us know and we'll get to them asynchronously. And have a great day, everyone.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, David. Thanks, Jason.